Welcome back, gang. It's Deltia from DeltiasGaming.com, and we got a cool little episode of Best in Slot. This time we're testing 3 stamina-specific DPS gear sets, kind of figuring out what will be the new meta in the Dark Brotherhood for crafting gear, while we farm some of them new cool sets. So what we're going to be testing today is Twiceborn Star, yes, on medium armor wearers versus Night Mother's Gaze versus good old Hunding's Rage, and see what they actually perform. We're going to be doing 2 tests on a Stamina Dragonite. 1 is with self buffs without an aggressive Warhorn. 2 is self buffs with an aggressive Warhorn. So we're going to use aggressive Warhorn. I'm going to show you what that is and talk a little bit about it more to pump up the DPS and like kind of simulate a trial type atmosphere and see what it does to the DPS. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to explain the testing environment here. So what class we used was a stamina-based Dragonite. Gilliam the Rogue was doing the DPS and the parsing while I was tanking it. So he was a Khajiit race, which gets 8% more weapon critical. That's very important. Also important about the Dragonite skill lines here, there's nothing that increases your critical strike damage inherently, or the amount of critical damage that you get from weapon critical. So Templars and Nightblades have a passive both that give them about 10% more critical strike damage. So that will be a little bit different results on those classes, but we try to keep it as neutral as possible, minus the whole Khajiit thing. And so when we say self buffs, that means I'm not doing any buffs for him. Now I use Ransack a couple times, which does reduce their armor, but he's also using Noxious Breath, which gives the exact same buff. So there's no other buffs that I'm giving him. Now I'm going to debuff the boss for damage, do a couple other things, and heal him and myself. But otherwise, it's based solely on him in the first test. The second test, however, is Aggressive Warhorn. What this does is it kind of simulates what a trial would do. Fully optimized trial groups want to rotate this buff typically every 10 seconds. Now, it lasts for 30 seconds, but the main thing here is Major Force, increasing critical strike damage by 30% for 9.5 seconds. That has particular relevance in this particular test because it's all about crit and crit damage, your crit multiplier. It's based 1.5, but with Twiceborn Star, you get a huge bump due to all Divine's gear. Same thing with Hunding's Rage, it just has weapon power. There's no really added advantage to crit multiplier. Night Mother's Gaze, based on crit, we're going to get to that in a little bit later, but just so you know, this is kind of the more trials-based DPS test, and the group test is basically self-buffed. Another thing that's particularly important is Rearming Trap. This gives minor force, increasing your critical strike damage by 12%. So Gilliam the Rogue's Khajiit Stam DK just turned endgame. Him and I leveled a character, my Templar, and the whole reason we're doing this test, we kind of wanted to see what now in this patch was the most damage per second. So keep in mind, he's going to maintain this buff, but he didn't even have Rearming Trap yet. He didn't have all of his skill lines leveled up, didn't have Fighter Skilled, so it's fully not optimized, but it's still a ridiculous amount of damage. So these two things do stack on top of each other. Hypothetically, you could have Minor Force going and Major Force going in a trial and just have an enormous amount of benefit to critical rating. So that's kind of what we're comparing. Armor reduction versus critical strike damage versus Hunding's Rage weapon power. So here's the basic gear setup that we use for this test. As you can see, the various sets are the 5 pieces. All Divines, all Max Glyphs, everything is completely legendary. We didn't use a 2-piece set like Mephalas or Valkynscoria because of the random proc chance, agility, and then Maelstrom weapons. One thing of note is the axe. The Maelstrom axe gives a really, really nice damage bleed. If it procs twice during a parse, you're looking at 3k damage specifically for that just one proc. Procs once, 1500. So that will skew the results, and I will tell you a little bit about that later on. But that's pretty much the only major RNG factor in this test. So the first set that we have to test here is Hunding's Rage. Usually it's the bread and butter of PvE and PvP for most builds since the beginning of time, but there's some more evidence here that this isn't that good of a set. It's really good in PvP because weapon damage scales well off of shields and you can't crit shields. But for PvE, the 3-piece max stamina is not as powerful as the 3-piece Night Mother's Gaze max weapon damage. And then let's see what the 300 weapon damage actually brings to the table in a DPS parse. All right, we're going to speed up the parse here because you don't want to see all that. But like I said, I'm just doing the self buffs. If you're wanting to see what Gil's skill rotation is in his bar setup, check out my website and also Twitter. He posted it there. So basically self buffs. I'm not really doing damage, just maintaining the boss and using magma shell here and there to make sure that we heal to full. So the results here were pretty interesting. This parse, Hunding's Rage with self-buffs only got 26,000 DPS. You can see in the bottom left corner of my screen right there. As we look at the parse more in detail, you can see there's no twin blade and blunt here. So you could add a little bit of DPS, but around 27,000 single target DPS self-buff with Hundings. Night Mother's Gaze is the next set that we have to test, and if you can see the 5-piece, it looks like that physical resistance wouldn't benefit over 300 weapon damage. Now, you're going to want to run this on a high crit build, like something like a Nightblade or something else, and only one person in your group has to do this, because it affects everyone's DPS and stamina. Why? Because the resistance applies to every single person. So having one person in your trial group run Night Mother's Gaze is absolutely spectacular DPS results. Same thing with Alkosh and some other sets. You can also notice the 3-piece is 129 weapon damage and the same amount of critical. So let's see what this does. Well, Night Mother's Gaze did a lot of damage. In fact, it was much faster than it was with Hunding's Raid. So Hunding's Raid did 27,000. This almost did 31,000. Now, there was one Twin Blade and Brunt proc, not two. But the fact that it outparsed Hunding's by that amount, and that everyone can benefit from Night Mother's Gaze, is spectacular. So give Night Mother's Gaze a thought, especially in group trials. You can see the DPS in the bottom left, and here's the parse with the one Twin Blade and Brunt proc down at the bottom. Last setup is Twiceborn Star, allowing you to have two Munda Stones at the same time. The key to making this effective is using the Thief for extra critical, which I think is around 16-18%. And the Shadow, which is also around 16 to 18% for critical strike damage. So the Thief and the Shadow. You notice that you get stam, health, and magic. So it's a pretty big utility, especially for races that don't have any health, like a Khajiit, a Redguard, or something like that, putting you about 17, 18,000 instead of 16k. So this benefits a lot from crit, especially a Khajiit crit race, and also if a class has some inherent way to get more crit or critical strike more, like a Templar or a Nightblade. So, what's this sucker gonna do? Well, Twiceborn Star brought the house down. Now, unfortunately, Gil didn't save the parse sheet for this particular fight, but it was 34 single target DPS self-buffed. 34,000 on a Stamina Dragonite, which is incredible. No Warhorn. So I was shocked. We were shocked both by it, but it turned out that was the highest. But we're not done yet. What happens when we add a Warhorn to it? So we got Hunding's Rage on here, and I use Stalwart Guard to make sure that he gets the minor force the entire time, and then about 10 seconds of major force. So that's going to basically give him a big boost to critical strike damage and the crit. So what does Hunding's Rage do? Well, it's at the back of the pack. 31, almost 32k single target damage, which I'm going to show you in the parse. Was not that impressive, and it really disappoints when we add some other things into it that you would see in a trial or a raid. Also, you can see the Twin Blade and Bunt didn't proc, so you could expect a little more damage with that. Holy buckets, Batman! Did Night Mother's Gaze bring the house down? When I was doing this parse and tanking for him, I'm like, this is going awfully fast. 36,000 single target DPS with just one Warhorn. Now, I did use Stalwart Guard on him so he wouldn't die, and also kept up the minor force the entire time. This result was quite shocking when we look at the numbers. We did get a bunch of Twin Blade and Blunt procs, but the amount of damage that Night Mother's Gaze did and also provides the group is amazing. So the second surprising result of this test was that Twiceborn Star didn't really see much of a performance increase when we did an aggressive Warhorn, though that may be due to the Twin Blade and Blunt not proccing as frequently, which we'll show in the parse sheet. So we got 34, almost 35k single target damage with Twiceborn Star with one aggressive Warhorn. So here's the par sheet I'm going to show you right here, and that's only about one twin blade and blunt proc. So it would go up significantly more, being somewhat on par with Night Mother's Gaze. So what does this tell us about stamina DPS? Well, a lot of sets are uniquely based off of what your class, your race has to offer. So Khajiit, more crit. Well, you're going to benefit from more crit. You might want to use Night Mother's Gaze. The problem with Night Mother's Gaze, if someone else is using it in your party, you're not going to see the advantage of that 5-piece set. Though you really need to have someone running it, at least in a trial. I would probably bet that it would be good to have a Stamina Nightblade, maybe a Khajiit running really high critical. Because remember, this is AoE, and the buff duration refreshes every time you crit. So it has like 100% uptime if you have high crit, which a Khajiit Nightblade can almost get 90, 100% if you spec it differently. We also have Twiceborn Star. Now on a Stam DK, it probably didn't see the benefit because it doesn't have specific passes that boost your critical damage, like my Templar here, increasing the damage bonus for critical strikes by 10%. I think that would make Twiceborn Star push over the edge for me, or maybe another Nightblade. So I went ahead and made a 5-piece Twiceborn Star. Another benefit that I like about Twiceborn Star is it does have health that it comes with it. So on a Red Guard instead of an Imperial, I'm about that 17k mark. Now when I get 2 points into Undaunted, I'll be even higher. And you can also see, look at how much crit I have. And the crit multiplier is fantastic. As far as Hunding's Rage goes, now it didn't do as much damage, but Hunding's Rage has flexible. If someone else has Night Mother's Gaze, it's going to work. If you don't want to screw around and get 2 Munda Stones all the time, Hunding's is going to work. If you want to put some an impan on or well fitted and do PvP, Hunding's Rage is going to work. But if you're looking for min-max super performance, I would honestly stick with Twiceborn Star or Night Mother's Gaze. So my Stam Templar best in slot list, basically Stam builds are all using Maelstrom Staff but Templars, and that's due to Burning Light. So my optimal build, I don't like Valken Scoria as at a 5 and a 2-piece, so I go 4 Night Mothers, 5 Twiceborn Star. Almost every other build is going to benefit from 5 and a 2-piece set with agility, jewelry, and Maelstrom weapons. So gang, let me know, was this super helpful to you guys? What conclusions did you draw from this? And I hope we took as much RNG out of it as possible so you guys cannot waste all them legendary gold mats and get something that's going to be effective for your character, your build, and race. Thank you so much for watching. Please share or subscribe if you like this content. My Stam Redguard is obviously max level, so we got some new builds coming out with the Harvester, a bunch of DK builds, and then, of course, Nightblades. Don't worry, I'm going to get something for you guys. A lot of stuff to come. Thank you so much.